We don't want to know our true desires because they're scary. It's just like, squish it all down. So today I want to talk about a concept related to surrender, this idea of letting go of the things we can't control or accepting the things we can't control in the first place. And I think of this as sort of my inner life secret, like the secret element to how I think and make my decisions and live my life that I really don't tell people about. And I've actually been putting off this video for a while because I didn't want to seem radical or strange, but I realized I can't go on to make the other content I want to make that relates to happiness or being successful without making this first. It's too critical to the way that I personally live my life that I felt I really needed to make this video. So here we are. Let's get into it. So for starters, I have to say this whole concept makes the most sense, at least the most sense to me, if you believe in a loving God. So if you believe that God exists and that he's a benevolent creator who has some interest in our individual lives. I actually think you can apply this outside of that set of beliefs. Like, I think it works sort of generally. I know some like non-religious people who I think do a lot of like listening and letting go. They don't really cling in their lives. You can kind of see that. So it is possible, but that's the context I'm coming at it from, and it makes the most sense to me that way. So that's what I'm going to speak in this video. If you are not religious or you don't necessarily believe in God, I think you can still apply some of these concepts. I've seen non-religious people live it out better than religious people oftentimes. So don't feel boxed in if that's not the way you live. Okay, so like I said, simply put, it has to do with letting go of the things we can't control or accepting what we can't control. As I understand it, like what makes the biggest difference is being able to trust that like someone is there who knows better than you, who can help take care of you. Like, it makes all of the difference. It's a very different way of living your life rather than feeling like you are personally the be all and end all of your own success and happiness. Like, you're in charge of everything. And I think I know like happy people, I know successful people who really don't live this way, but the happiest, like the most grounded, and when I say happy, what I really mean is joyful in spite of circumstances. The most joyful people I know do practice this. They do live this way, whether or not they would use the same terms that I use to describe it. So I think there's really something here. It's not just, I'm not only speaking from my own experience. I've seen other people who adopt this, and it really does make a difference in their lives. I feel like I've been speaking very vaguely, so I'm going to give you guys a metaphor to illustrate exactly what I'm talking about. So I took this physical theater summer intensive. It was awesome. So for 5 days, actually in Austria, I studied physical theater. We did all of this bonkers training, so fun. But one of the exercises we did every day, so I did this every day for 5 days, was you would get a partner, and probably some of you have done this at like summer camp. It's where one person closes their eyes and they put their hand on the other person's shoulder, and you get led around the room and you can't see anything, and it's a very simple trust exercise, right? Very basic. And when you first start out, you're gonna be nervous because you can't see anything. You're not in control of where you're going. Another person is leading you around. You have to have some basic trust in this other person not to walk you into a wall. And so at first it can be pretty uncomfortable. People tend to be kind of slow and really cautious, but it was fascinating doing it with this tight group of people, right? I was working and living with these people for a week, so you naturally develop some pretty good bonds and quick trust. It was fascinating doing it for 5 days with this group of people and doing the same exercise many times over. The progression in the level of trust, but like in the experience of this exercise was fascinating. So when you first start out, you put your hand on this person's shoulder and your eyes are shut. So all you have to go off of is the sense from touching another person's shoulder, and it feels like so little guidance to go off of. So you kind of follow them around and you do fine, right? Well, as you do it more, for one thing, you get much better at listening. So you get better at trusting and you get better at listening as you do it over and over again. You can move around the space more freely. You can move faster or slower, go up and down. We got to where we could like, one person could actually roll on the floor and the other person had to kind of climb over them, and you stayed connected the whole time. I mean, it was a physical theater exercise. You could get really creative, and it got to be fun. For one thing, it got to be really fun as you learn to trust more, but also as you learn to listen more. This was amazing to me. I remember thinking at first that touching someone's shoulder gave me so little data. There was so little I could read from that. I barely knew where I was at all. But then with time, It was like a little motion of their shoulder, and I could visually in my mind, I could see what their entire shoulder blade was doing. And then with time, I was like, I know where your whole torso is. Like, I can tell how you're orienting in space and exactly how I need to orient to stay right with you. I can feel like so much information from this one spot. My hand isn't touching anything more, but I can read way more because I've gotten so much better at listening. And so it made it much easier to be like, oh, this is where we're going now. Oh, I understand. Like, I can almost read your intentions much more clearly. So this is my metaphor, right? I want you to try and imagine, like, apply this scenario to your life in a spiritual context. Imagine that we're all blind people, which we are. We can't see the future. We don't really know what the best thing to do for us in a given circumstance is. We can take a pretty good guess. We usually don't know what the best thing to do is. And we often don't know what we actually want. Like, the true desires of our hearts, we don't really know those. Like, how many movies have you seen where someone absolutely knows what they want at the beginning? The entire point of the movie is that they discover they want something much greater. They want something much deeper than that. And the whole audience can see it. And finally, at the end of the video, the main character gets it too, and they pursue what they really desire. And then they're much more deeply happy. We're not really in tune with our true desires. So that's another thing. So we are the blind follows. And then it's like, if we connect to God, he can lead us through. Like, he has a path for us. And this is a way that I've practiced living in my own life through prayer, through meditation, through deliberately trying to follow where I'm being led in big life decisions and seeing where it leads me. And it's crazy. People say, that's terrifying. Like, that's a terrifying way to live your life. Why would you give up that control? And especially now that I've practiced living this way for a long time, I'm like, I can't see anything. What do you mean I'm living the terror? I'm doing my best to listen and follow you. You're just making decisions left and right. You're tripping over chairs. And it's a practice. It's absolutely a practice. I'm not saying that I am perfectly centered, that I always follow where I'm led, and I never get into trouble or make mistakes, but it's this desire to keep coming back to following that's very different. And it makes sense to me that people have a strong reaction because we don't like to be dependent. We really don't. We don't like to feel out of control or like we don't have a handle on our lives because it's scary. Like I said, anyone starting this trust exercise for the first time, like if you close your eyes and you give power over to someone else, it's very scary. It's just like I said, the difference as I see it is that I'm not closing my eyes. There's no option to open them. I can't see the future. I don't know what I need to do. So it makes infinite sense to me to listen as best I can and follow as best I can. Okay, now side note here with regards to religion, because I think this is very important. I see this idea of following as like critical, absolutely critical. And it has to do with developing self-awareness and listening. And again, so many people I think listen really well and have no religious context in their lives. I think we can agree that everyone has a little internal guide, like call it your conscience, call it gut instinct, if you will. But we all have like an interior guide, and we can strengthen that or hinder it based on our decisions. And again, I talk about this idea of like, what are your true desires? We all desire at different points in our lives lots of crap. How many times do we want something that's definitely bad for us? Like, I want to sleep till noon on a regular Wednesday, like for no good reason. I just want to. Yeah, sure, you want to. That's not going to make you happy. That's not going to make you fulfilled. This is not breaking news. We want things that are not good for us. And when we give into that, it makes it just a tiny, tiny bit harder to like hear that prompting, that voice, that guide that wants more. And then when we do our best to follow that, we say, no, I'm going to discipline myself a little and get out of bed at 8. I'm going to get up at a reasonable time. Then it encourages that voice a little bit, like a tiny bit. And this is pursuing virtue, okay? And virtue is also a taboo topic today because we don't want to be boxed in by religion. Virtue exists outside of religion. Virtue is a human dynamic. It actually, the word means strength or power. So many people today don't pursue their own strength. They don't pursue their true power. They squash down the voice. They're trying not to listen so that we can be like free, in quotes, and self-indulgent and like lazy for our whole lives. And we don't want to put effort into our relationships. We don't want to put effort into our work or our hobbies. We don't want to know our true desires because they're scary. It's just like squish it all down. And there's so much joy and truth and life to be found from doing the opposite and trying really hard to dig out the truth and listen to the truth. And you can do that outside of a religious context. Another thing I like for this metaphor is technically you could do this blind follow exercise without having any physical touch. You could do call and response, right? This would be a little harder. It'd be a little bit harder to follow where you're going. You might not get there like as quickly. You'd have to pause more. It'd be a little bit tedious, but you could do it. For me, that's how it makes sense, because I really do get a lot of value out of religious practice and faith, like concrete faith and the Bible. And like, there are these roots that I think are very, very powerful. There are people who are not connected to that who are listening so well, who like really care about pursuing virtue, even if they never call it virtue. They live really well and they're happy people too. So that's really worth acknowledging. And on the flip side, I know people who are deeply entrenched in religion who really don't listen. They're not in tune with their true desires. They're not trying to actively pursue virtue, even though they probably think about virtue. They probably imagine that they are. There's a real lack of charity there. There's a refusal to get over themselves and put other people first. And I think we know this. We know that there are religious people who don't actually live this way, and we're scandalized by it, and we think, oh, I don't want anything to do with religion because look at those people. I mean, it's sad. Sure, they don't really represent very well, but it doesn't actually mean that the religion itself has nothing to offer. Like, you could be holding on to the guide, like totally connected, and refusing to go where they lead. There's no reason you couldn't do that. You could be like, no, I just want to go over there. I don't care where you're guiding me. I don't want to go. We do that all the time. Like, I do that all the time. It's a process. Like the phrase practicing Catholicism or practicing whatever faith. It's a work in progress until you die and then hopefully go to heaven. So that was a lot. I think I went a little bit off the map there, but my point is that this is sort of the crux for myself of how I live my life. And I have found it becomes so liberating. I mean, like crazy, because the more that little bit of trust is tested and then proven, like the more confidence you have taking bigger leaps and like bigger risks, and it kind of turns life from sort of a strict sort of rule bound, at least for myself, because I tend to be very strict and rule bound, if anything. It turns life from being strict and kind of stuck in rule bound to being like expansive and free, and there's this element of adventure where you're not really sure where you're gonna go. You don't quite know where you're going to end up, but it's going to be okay. Honestly, guys, it's next level. And like I say, probably a bunch of you watching this already live this way a little bit, whether you think about God in particular or not. So many people listen and follow, but in our society today, we're totally discouraged from that. We're just told to like take whatever pleasure seeking desires at the top of our minds and makes life the easiest and just chase it all the way, and that makes people really miserable. It's crazy. So that's enough for part one. This is a huge concept. I'm definitely going to do a part two talking just at least a little bit about the concept of suffering, because that's the whole thing, right? People don't want to follow someone else because they don't want to get knocked into a wall. We don't want to trip over a chair, and it feels like my odds of not doing that are much better if I take really tight control of my own life. Like, that's what I want to do. And I haven't talked about that yet in this video, so there will be a part two just addressing a little bit the issue of suffering. Also, I'm getting over bronchitis, so I'm not supposed to be talking right now, so if my voice sounds weird, that's why, but here we are. It's okay. We're getting over it. Also, if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.